Hello everyone, the Story Web Blogger here. To celebrate the beginning of the school year, I'm presenting a mix of videos and blog posts that I've titled Fantasy Lit 101. This is a basic discussion of Freud's major theories with my classic nerdy twist, mainly meant to provide some introductory information for a post I'll have up in a few days. So this is Freud. Yeah, I know, not exactly a fun-looking guy. Freud is an Austrian psychiatrist who lived from 1856 to 1939. He wrote all of his major works, including The Interpretation of Dreams, in German. He created a school of psychology known as psychoanalysis, and although his theories have largely been disregarded in terms of psychology, he remains an influential writer in the field of literature. This is mostly because Freud cited many literary examples to expand on his theories. Freud's most important theory is the presence of id, ego, and superego. Often this idea is represented with an iceberg. The largest part of the iceberg, hiding under the water, is the id. Freud theorized that the id contained all of the negative parts of our mind. This includes all of our impulses, like impulse shopping, violence, temptation, our animalistic instincts, and basically anything that would be seen as sinful. The id operates under the pleasure principle, which is only concerned with satisfying its desires. The superego contains the part of our mind that we would consider good or responsible. As we are raised, we are conditioned by a set of standards which eventually create a moral rulebook. This can also be called a moral compass. The superego is composed of the conscious and the ideal self. The superego's main goal is for us to be perfectly moral beings. The ego, represented at the waterline of the iceberg, is the point of consciousness. While we are not aware of our id or superego, the ego is the part of our mind that we are aware of. The ego mediates between the id and superego. It operates under the reality principle, attempting to satisfy the id while using the superego to gauge possible consequences. Please keep in mind the difference between these two words. The superego is our conscience, but the ego is our conscious mind. To review, the id operates under the pleasure principle, the superego contains the conscience and the ideal self, and the ego follows the reality principle, trying to satisfy our desires while keeping within the rules of society. So, for our fantasy example, let's talk about the werewolf. The werewolf is the perfect example of the id, ego, superego dilemma because it exemplifies the constant struggle between man and wolf. The man knows he cannot freely act as a wolf, but he cannot ignore his physical needs to become one. He must find a way to satisfy his animal needs while still obeying his superego. In case you haven't yet realized, Freud was all about repression. Remember, the id, the biggest part of our personality, is constantly being denied what it wants. Since it can't have what it wants, the ego attempts to give it the next best thing. This is where the Oedipus complex comes in. According to Freud, a disruption during the phallic stage, which we'll talk about in a minute, causes a man to desire to kill his father and marry his mother. He cites Oedipus Rex, a famous play by Sophocles, in which Oedipus discovered he has accidentally killed his father and married his mother. According to Freud, this is no accident at all, but Oedipus's desires manifesting themselves. This is probably a good place to point out that Freud said basically nothing about women, as if he simply didn't think about us psychologically. Anyway, most of us simply cannot kill our dads and claim our moms. The consequences of this would simply be too dire. So the id's desires manifest themselves in distorted ways. This includes dreams. My professor always cited the example of dreaming you're viewing some adult material while your mom walks in. Gross, right? The repression of the Oedipus complex is so strong that even a dream could not directly represent this desire. Another example is jokes. We all know that one person who makes too many creepy jokes, and in this case, it would be about having sex with their mom. Weird. Don't be friends with that person. Another example is Freudian slips. A Freudian slip could simply be perceived as a small mistake, but Freud believed it belied a deep desire slipping to the surface. Remember, Freud thought all traumatic experiences come back to haunt us, even if they happened when we were too young to remember them. This brings us to the last thing I want to talk about today. Since Freud was all about animalistic desires, he was also all about sex. Seriously, this guy thought we have a libido as babies. And the libido is sexual energy, so he thought we were thinking about sex when we were babies. He put forth the theory that this libido develops in several stages as we grow up. As disturbing as it is, Freud interpreted a baby's suckling as a stage of sexual development. If there was any traumatic experience related to this sexual development, called the oral stage, the trauma might be repressed for a period of time, but would eventually manifest in adulthood as an oral fixation. The adult would be obsessed with oral stimulation. That's pretty much what I wanted to say today. Keep an eye out for my next post, which should be up within a week. I'll be discussing the vampire as a symbol of oral fixation. And I think after what we talked about today, that shouldn't really be all that much of a hard jump to make. Before I end, I just want to say really quickly that yeah, Freud was a strange man who was obsessed with penises and did a lot of cocaine, but he also had some incredibly fascinating and important theories. He was a huge influence on later writers, including Lacan, Jung, and Bloom. And if you've read anything those guys have written, they say really cool things about literature. If we forget that Freud actually tried to apply this stuff to the human psyche and think instead about it as interesting hypothetical content, it becomes very captivating to study. Thank you. Please be sure to check out my blog if you haven't already, as well as my Facebook page. If you have any questions, please comment on the blog and send them to me via email. Have a good start to the school year.